And so like, the real innovation, the real money is sort of made after the bubble, which is kind of funny. But it doesn't mean you can't be a bubble beneficiary. You look at Mark Cuban, Netscape. I was just looking the other day, the history of the Netscape acquisition by AOL. There usually is some FOMO on the corporate side too, where the corporations kind of go a little crazy trying to buy their way into the next paradigm shift. So I hope that we see this happen. So as I was saying a second ago, unlike the internet, which I know it sounds a little funny to say, that the internet didn't have an immediate functional use case or functionality at the inception. But I think if you go back in time, you wouldn't disagree with me. There was still a lot of people asking, what is this good for? And there were a lot of companies like Webvan and Cosmos and the Globe, and even one that my boss was running at the time called thestreet.com. There was a lot of questions about, well, do we really need this? And now, of course, we can't imagine our lives without the internet. But at the time, there wasn't YouTube. Google was still fairly nascent. There was no social media. So most of the things we use the internet for today didn't exist at the start of the bubble. So unlike that, we have OpenAI, which has this immediately functional product. I remember having sitting in jail and calling a friend of mine and asking him to go to a website called talktotransformer.com. And this was run on GPT-2. And it was the only website that really kind of ported GPT-2 API to the web. And I asked my friend he said, what do I type in this thing? And again, we're on this monitored jail call. It's 15 minutes in length at most. And I said, why don't you ask it, why did Carl Icahn and Martin Shkreli get into a fight? Now, I don't know Carl Icahn. I've never met him. And I doubt I'd have a fight with him. I'd probably fanboy out a little. But regardless, he'd probably say something curt and nasty to me. But regardless, I'm a huge Carl Icahn fan. But my friend knows that I've never met him, don't know him. And so anyway, he typed it in, and I could hear his gasp. I could hear his jaw drop. He's like, Martin, this thing's writing the whole story. I said, I know. You could ask it anything, and it'll come up with this creative idea. He's like, this is insane. And I said, yeah, it really is. Of course, I'm sitting in jail, so there's not much I could do. But we've seen GPT-3 and 3.5 Turbo and 4, all start to eclipse what we saw there. And my point is that we have immediate functionality in large language models that we didn't have really on the internet side that is useful right out of the box. It's useful right now. That should be enough to make a bubble as big as the internet, if not bigger. So I think that crypto also sort of suffered from this problem of cool technology, but where are we going with this? And big potential use case, changing the scope of money and things like that, but no real great utility out of the box. You still have to sort of suspend disbelief that you have a store of value, that's not ephemeral. You have to sort of ask yourself if this is really right for you, given, let's say, you're a corporation or something like that. There's no immediate impetus to say, if you're Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble or Walmart, to say, okay, let me change a bunch of our treasury to Bitcoin. It doesn't really make sense right away, right? There's no, not just use case, but there's no imperative. There's no drive to sort of say, let me change how I'm going to do things. And it very well may be that crypto in 20 years or 5 years or 10 years, who knows, becomes like a very standard thing for corporations and people to have, 20 or 30% of their wealth in. But as of now, there was no event that forced you to use it. Today, you're sort of forced to use it. You're forced to use AI or you get left behind. And I noticed in the New England Journal and a couple of other medical publications that, and I'm curious if this is happening in other spaces, but I still pay attention to medicine quite a bit. I noticed that there's a FOMO going on where, unprecedented in a sense, that New England Journal has had all these articles about, GPT and doctors. How do we use this thing? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it dangerous? What exactly? And it's really an interesting kind of, paradigm. I've been spending a lot of time writing this thing called BookGen, which you can find on my GitHub, which is a little tool that writes a book, and it writes a 200-page book for you based on GPT. And to my knowledge, there's no such library like this out there. And I even put out a book on Amazon using it, and I'm just putting the finishing touches on like this 2.0 that uses GPT-4, and I have to say the writing is marvelous. It's still, not a great book, but the writing was, I was a lit minor. That qualifies me to do anything, but I love books. I love reading, and it writes beautifully for what it's worth. Its big issue is the stateless model of these LLMs, where the LLM is doing a very big calculation. It's not remembering anything. It can't remember anything. It's just not built to do that. So you have to sort of do all these tricks that I mentioned LangChain earlier. But there's a number of other tricks, and they're all pretty well known in the art, even though I see publications every day that kind of make me tear my hair out that act as if those innovations are brand new when they're not brand new. They're mostly stuff that people have been doing for close to a year now. But it's good that it's coming out in literature, and everyone should be able to use these tools effectively. But basically using different techniques that people have picked up on. There are ways to sort of get these LLMs to understand state to some extent, but they'll never really understand state. Anyway, I'm getting a little sidetracked on the technology there, but I'm hoping and I think that AI will have a bubble phenomenon as big or bigger than the internet, which is saying a lot because the internet bubble was very, very unprecedented. And I think it took Microsoft more than 10 years to recover its internet bubble price. Most stocks never recovered. The median stock never recovered its internet bubble price of 2000. So to a lot of people, this was a defining moment. To most people today, we don't look back on it as that important. But I think that, if you look at some of the wealth that was created back then, a lot of it was, we look back and call it undeserved. But, if you think about the market from the Buffett perspective of Mr. Market, shouting prices at you every day, if you get a price that's really wild, you're sort of tempted to sell. So, one of the big things about bubbles that we've seen in the past is you want to avoid the bubble popping, but you also kind of want to ride the bubble, expanding. And I do feel like there's a seismic shift. I know Biden made some comments about AI today, and he said that, the headline was that he doesn't find it to be dangerous. And I think everybody knows I'm part of this, EAC group that is trying to evangelize the acceleration of technology instead of the retardation of it. I think that, there's a lot of good reasons for that. I won't, sort of try to proselytize here. But I think that, I know that there's some powerful, I want to call them enemies, but people with other viewpoints, and we should respect them too. But I also think that, this kind of technology is so impressive and so important that we're close to probably the most defining achievement in mankind's history, which is called AGI. Again, going back to my childhood, I read a lot by this guy named Ray Kurzweil, who was, and I don't know, maybe still is, a mix of a genius and a quack. Probably more genius than quack, but Ray also takes hundreds of pills every day to try to extend his life, which is probably the quack side of him. But he was actually a pretty formative person in sort of pop science and also a bit AI. He is also known for the Kurzweil keyboard, which he also invented. So he's a bit of an inventor and a mix of things, and he worked at Google Brain for a while. It's not clear that he actually was very productive there. But regardless, Kurzweil wrote a number of books about the singularity, and that term was actually coined a while before him.